Conversations from the Cave is a raw self-help podcast dedicated to discussing men's issues. From pornography to parenting, from religion to real life, from learning to loving. We discuss the real issues that affect real men every day. Join us each week for powerful, revealing Conversations from the Cave. Now your host, Kirk Kennedy.
This is Conversations from the Cave. I'm your host, Kirk Kennedy. Tonight's cave discussion is She Makes More Than You Do. Now who's the boss? Our discussion tonight will be with our panel members. Tonight, to my right, we have B.A. Sir, can you give us a little shout out, B.A.?
Hello, this is B.A. Just live here in Huntsville and changing lives one word at a time.
And also to my left, we have Nola. Nola, can you give us a shout out, sir?
Yes, this is Nola73. Meet you where you at.
Well, gentlemen, this evening's topic is one that is a touchy subject. A lot of times during economic downturns and changes to employment, finances can become a challenge. So tonight's topic is She Earns More Money Than You Do. Now who's the boss? So we're going to open this up with a simple question. Does the person who earns the most money command or wield the most power in the family? B.A., would you like to chime in on that one?
All right. Hello, good people out there. Basically, what I want to say, because I've been putting a little bit of thought into this, but, you know, it goes back to when you thought about marrying this person, man or a man, from the man's perspective or a woman's perspective, in my opinion, is that y'all made a commitment to each other that it didn't matter about the money. It mattered about who y'all are together. So the money should not be an issue. The money does become an issue because we have emotions. We have feelings. And, you know, any reason to have a conflict, and money is one of the biggest reasons for conflicts in marriages. But in my personal opinion, I don't believe that the power should go either way. It should just be a team of you and him, or vice versa, and y'all just work it out.
So what I'm hearing you say is that you believe the team mentality is much more important than the source of the income to the family. Nola, do you also agree with that, or do you have a differing opinion?
Well, I can agree and also have a different opinion. What I believe is that you have a hierarchy. Both parties are equal, man and a woman. It depends on who gives the authority away. If the man feel like, you know what, I'm the head of the household. Now, let's get one thing understood. The head of the household has nothing to do with money. It has nothing to do with who makes the most, who brings in the most. It has everything to do with the man being the most dominant for as the protector. That's the head of the household. If a woman was single, she would be considered the head of her house, raising her kids, or just a single person if that's the case. But when it comes down to making money, the head of the house always falls under the entitlement towards the man. And it's just a role that a man has just with kids. Let's take, for example, a woman can say something to the kids, not that her authority isn't viable to the kids, but when a man said, the kids, it changes the dynamics, the whole gene pool inside of a kid, because it's a deeper voice. It's like when you look at animal kingdoms, when you look at a lioness growl at her cub, but when the male lion comes along, everything ceases. It's just something about that male's figure. And so when you're talking about money and basing that based upon who's the head of the house because who makes more, your ideology is wrong, because you look to a figure, not a substance.
Interesting philosophy. So what I'm hearing you say is the position of headship in a family is not based on revenue. That a person who is in a role, for example, just because you don't earn more money than, say, your wife does, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are no longer in the position of headship. Let me throw a question out in a slightly different way. Do you feel that issues of money are issues also of power? Now, this is slightly different than revenue generating. It's the dispensing or the direction where money is spent. Your thoughts on that. So if she's making more money, does she decide how it's spent, or is that still a joint decision made by the team or just the man?
NOLA 73 meet you where you at. It's always going to be. It goes back to when we talked about in the last couple of episodes about communication. When you have communication, you have that ability to sit down and say, okay, listen, this is how we should spend our money based upon, the bills that we have brought to the table. In respect, if we have to make an executive decision on how we're going to spend this money, it ultimately should fall on the man, not who makes the most money. Now, again, that's rules that need to be talked about. That's rules that needs to be stated. If a woman feel like she's more dominant than a man because of how much money she make, well, what happens when that role is turned around, and she no longer makes that kind of money, or he gets a job and he now makes more? Do she still want to have that power, that authority? And if that's the case, she does. Then she have a problem with submission. And I'm not saying submission as to where she's giving her whole being to this man and she don't have no authority. She have a problem with submission that's saying who is the household, the head of that house. Has nothing to do with revenue. It has nothing to do with how fancy of a car you drive or any type of materialistic thing. At the end of the day, it's about who has the wisest decision. When you say head of the household, it falls up under a man who has the wisdom to say, you know what? This is how we should do it based upon these preliminaries or based upon these procedures. I've thought about it. I've looked into it. I've prayed about it. And this is the route we're going to go. This is the route God told me to take. And if that man or that head of the household step out and say, this is the route, and the woman comes back and say, see, I told you this is the way we should have did it. Okay, we all make mistakes. If that man is a man, he'll say, well, you know what, baby? I thought this is the way we should have did it. But obviously you was right. And your decision was the right one. We should have went with it. It's nothing against my manhood. I felt comfortable with going this way. It was just the wrong way. And at some point in time, the decision that he made, if he's a man, he's going to own up to his mistake. She's going to see his mistake and see that, you know what, as a man, he owns up to it. And she will start respecting him even more. Why? Because he don't have a problem with coming to her and say, you know what, babe, your decision was right.
Yeah, that speaks to a man's humility. I think when you talk about the team mentality, I think the first thing that I think both of you guys agree on is that the survival of the unit is more important than the executive decision-making power of any individual. So it is far more important for a man and a woman to prosper as a team than it is for one person or the other person to get their way. Number two, when talking about revenue generating, it goes to the pool or to the team, and the choices to utilize those resources are also under the minding or direction of the team members. The interesting thing that I like about what you said, Nola, in addition, was the importance of humility in leadership. And I think more often than not, a man who is in a leadership role should seek input from his wife or significant other, primarily because it provides balance to a decision, particularly if she has a differing perspective. I think many times people are looking for yes men and women to surround themselves with, people who will always tell you yes, 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 when in reality, it's probably more important to have someone who will say, did you consider point B or point C or point D? And I think that it's really important to consider input from your spouse. I wanted to cite an example in my own personal life that sort of bore this out. When I first came to the South and to this region, I had wanted to move to a particular part of town, and I made every effort to build my whole community around this particular zip code. And what ended up happening was, in the process, within 3 days, we were burglarized 3 times. So every time we came to that residence that we were renting, someone had kicked in the door and taken items out of the house. We hadn't even unpacked yet. They just started unpacking or taking the boxes out and I guess pawning them or whatever. It was a terrible neighborhood, but we didn't know, or I didn't know. And I was certain that I was making the right decision because I thought that it was the best place to be in terms of setting up a business. But it turned out that it wasn't. My female companion found a location which ended up being where I currently reside. But in addition, she was able to facilitate where my business would be as well, because she was observant and has a better skill at looking at real estate than I do. In the grand scheme of things, I probably could have made a lot of decisions kicking and screaming, but I realized that her skill set when it came to real estate far outdid mine. And I had to defer to her input because she actually was much more observant, and turned out she was in fact correct. And because I chose to humble myself and listen and made a better decision with input, the result was that we both prosper. And I think that it's really important to consider the team and consider the value of each individual member's contribution. I think there's something else that also comes to mind that you guys made mention of, which is similar in value, different in roles, or different in purpose. And I think that's another thing that tends to get lost when we surround ourselves with just decisions on money. We see, well, if she's able to generate X amount of dollars, she may be in a better position to do X, Y, and Z. Well, the team is what's most important. So in order for the team to prosper, both parties have to move forward. And I think it's really, really important to establish that as a central tenet of a good relationship, and to recognize that there may be different roles for each individual, but it doesn't diminish the value of the position that each member holds. So those are a couple of observations. Do you guys agree? Do you disagree? Do you have differing opinions or different observations?
All right, I agree with what you're saying there, Mr. Kurt. And the reason I say that, I'm sitting here listening to you and I'm thinking of a team. And I'll give an example of team, not necessarily the husband and wife team, but the idea of a team is to always have role players. An example I saw earlier was right now there's an NCAA tournament going on. And in this game, this role player didn't look like he was going to have an important part, didn't, look like he was going to have, big points, big scores, like what you look for, on TV or in a team sometimes, because you got to have those strengths and weaknesses. Well, this guy, being the role player, being in the right role at the right time, he scores the winning basket. Well, let me go away from basketball for now and just say there's a lot of strengths and weaknesses to a team. That's why coaches put people together, and that's why husband and wife are together, is the strengths and the weaknesses. Because usually and let me tell you that you've got to look at your partner and say, all right, and most people don't do this, but you've got to say that my strengths are here, 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 and then that person, like my wife, let's say she writes down all her strengths. I write down all my strengths. And then you got to do the weaknesses the same way. Because typically what happens is wherever I'm strong in, she's weak in. But then where I'm weak in, which is, as Kurt was saying, an example of humility, bending my ideas, my selfishness, everything like that, to listen to her is, I'm going to have, her strengths are going to be my weaknesses and vice versa.
And you can benefit from her strengths. I think you're right that a lot of times we're fit together in a way that provides balance to the whole unit. I know, for example, in my situation, my significant other is much more outgoing than I am. I'm not really very outgoing, but I'm much more focused. So, she's never met a person that she didn't like and couldn't relate to. But in my case, I tend to just let her do that. She's far more expressive and far more outgoing. But the balance of the two allows for a much stronger team. And I think that's one thing that a lot of times we lose in the discussion of manhood and womanhood, is the fact that there are certain innate strengths and weaknesses in each of us. And then when we work together as a team, that balance allows for the team to grow, both personally and then as a unit, because those things are oftentimes areas where we have to humble ourselves, as I've been saying, to say, you know what? I think I could use some help on this. And the result can be much improved. Nola, you were going to share a thought, before BA went into a discussion. Could you share that thought, or did you remember it?
No, I can't remember it. BA pretty much, summarized everything up.
Gentlemen, I want to turn the corner just a little bit on our discussion.